They served the papers while I was making waffles for Emma. A courier in a navy suit handed me a manila envelope like it was a polite funeral program. He didn't look me in the eye. He had that bored, professional calm of somebody who drops grenades for a living and calls it an errand. Inside were legal words: eviction, emergency custody motion, allegations of instability, printed in small, reasonable type that said, "You are less than you were." The waffles were still steaming on the counter. Emma likes them with strawberries cut into hearts. I do that for her on school mornings because it keeps the routine feeling safe, like the world is still predictable. The butter was soft. The syrup was warm in the microwave. And I'm holding a packet that says I have 10 days to vacate the marital residence, like I'm a tenant and not the man who tore up his hands replacing the rotten subfloor in the laundry room last winter. "Sir, I just need your signature," the courier said. "Sir." I almost laughed. I signed. He left like he'd delivered dry cleaning. I stood there with the envelope open in my hand, and the kitchen felt tilted, like the floor had shifted half an inch, and no one warned me. Lila practiced grief the way realtors practice staging, precise, emotional, and built for the camera. She wanted me out so Tyler could move in and call it a starter asset he had earned with his charm. That's what he called it the one time he forgot I was in the next room. It's about getting my first asset. Not a home. Not a place for Emma. An asset. He talked about this house the way guys talk about sneaker drops. My daughter slammed a cereal bowl into the sink, not out of rage, but because she had learned that loud noises rearranged adult moods. Emma stood on a stool, bare feet rocking on the edge, hair still tangled from sleep, and looked at me as if I were a problem to be solved instead of a person with a plan. She's 7, and 7 is that age where kids start clocking tone, gaps, lies. She can tell when I'm pretending. She can smell it on me. "Are we leaving?" she asked. "We're not moving anywhere," I said. That was the first lie of the morning. A man tells his child what he needs to keep her from looking away. You don't say, "Your mother is trying to erase me by paperwork so her new boyfriend can play homeowner." You don't say, "If a judge buys her story, half your stuff is going into a storage unit, and the other half is getting sold in a hurry, and I will sleep in Milo's spare room and pretend it's an adventure." You don't tell her any of that. You smile and cut another strawberry. Emma didn't push. She just nodded once, like she was filing my answer into a drawer labeled, "To be checked later." I went next door to Milo, who had the kind of face that never promised miracles but kept a man honest. Retired firefighter, 62, back like an oak beam, hands like old rope. He'd watched this street longer than any cop. He'd seen marriages collapse, grieving families haul mattresses to the curb, bank guys in vests taking pictures of porches for foreclosure records. He knew what it looked like when a house was about to become an argument instead of a shelter. He was already out in his driveway like he felt something turn. He drinks his coffee outside every morning, says the air keeps him from getting bitter. "You gonna roll over or stand up?" he asked when he saw the papers in my hand. That's all he said. "No, I'm sorry. No, it'll be fine." I respected him more for that than anything. Inside his garage, the air smelled like metal and lawn oil. I took apart the toaster with my fingers to keep my hands busy and listened to myself breathe. I could feel adrenaline trying to talk me into stupid moves. You don't want to do stupid moves in a custody fight. Stupid gets printed in affidavits. "She filed emergency custody," I said. Milo grunted. "She's saying I'm unstable," I said. Milo grunted again, but it wasn't the same grunt. The second one had a drop of anger in it on my behalf. "You can't just," Lila had said to me once, palms open like a woman bargaining for sympathy she did not feel. "You can't make this ugly for Emma." She always said Emma's name like it was a talisman, like you were supposed to lower your voice when you heard it and admit she was right. "We can do this in a way that's gentle for her," she'd said, "if you don't make it adversarial." Gentle for her. Not for me. Never for me. "I'll stay here with Emma," she said that night in the kitchen, months ago, like we were business partners discussing logistics. You can get a place near enough that pickups are easy. It'll be good for you to have your own space. Space to decompress. You're always so tense around here. That was the first time I felt something cold go through me, like a cord tightening. The arrogance of telling a father he cannot decide what keeps his child safe made a different thing happen in me. It stopped being sadness. It turned into planning. I decided it was time to learn how stories get told and who pays for them. Lila works in real estate staging, luxury home experience design, in her words. Translation: she moves rented furniture into houses that aren't hers, lights fake candles and posts filtered photos so buyers imagine a lifestyle. She's good at it. She understands angles. She knows where to place a blanket to look unplanned. She knows which words make rich people feel moral about wanting nicer countertops. She also learned somewhere along the line that if you talk like you're protecting a child, people assume you're the good one. I started cataloging small betrayals like grocery receipts. You don't get to rewrite me, I thought, not without me keeping copies. So I kept them. Phone calls she made past midnight, step out onto the porch, voice low, laughing, saying, "No, he's still awake. I can't talk. I'll call you after he's out." I logged the dates, the length of the calls, who she saved as Jared with a heart, who was actually Tyler, judging from the call history on his phone the day he left it unlocked on the dining room table. Not illegal to look at a phone that's sitting face down in your own dining room. As the story unfolds, hit the hype button, like, subscribe, and write in the comments. Would you forgive them or walk away? Milo said the smartest men he knew didn't always wear suits. He said, "You work computers for lawyers. You know how narratives get built. You can break what they build." I had $30 and a library of grudges. I also had access to the small, stupid ways people prove their own dishonesty. Emma had a tablet. 7-year-olds are not saviors, but they are witnesses. She came down that night with a show she'd recorded, Lila and Tyler in the driveway the week before, whispering lines like actors memorizing a scene. Tyler repeated, "He's dangerous. He's unpredictable." And Lila coached him on cadence. My stomach turned in a way that turned rage into method. When she asked, "Daddy, is this bad?" I pressed play and did the thing I should have done long ago. I stopped hoping this would be fixable and started making it costly. On the courthouse day, I watched Lila practice sympathy at the clerk's window, while Tyler flexed in his blazer like a man showing off new teeth. The judge listened to the tablet clip in private, and then asked plainly whether rehearsed statements might be why the court should hesitate. That hesitation bought us time. It did not buy mercy. "Your Honor," Lila's lawyer had said with laconic friendliness, "we're concerned for the child's stability while Mr. Mercer continues to act erratically." The word erratic was a velvet hammer. I heard it and felt my skin harden. I should have called a lawyer. I should have done 100 things. Instead, I held Emma's tablet in my pocket and remembered how much of their world existed on small screens. When the judge frowned and asked my daughter if she wanted to speak, the room smelled like the inside of an old book. Emma walked up, tiny and steady. The judge watched the clip on the tablet and then looked at Lila as if searching for an answer to a riddle. "Where did this recording come from?" he asked. "From home," Emma said, and the little boy behind her whispered, "Cool." Lila's face did what guilt does to practiced faces. It didn't fall so much as split along a seam. The judge didn't make a ruling that day except to keep things as they were until a full hearing, and that footnote of time was all I needed to set a few things in motion. After the hearing, a corner in the courthouse parking garage smelled like exhaust and fear. Tyler shoved me hard enough to bruise ego, if not ribs. I did the legal thing and recorded the shove. I also told him, very quietly, that his car had been parking on my property, half hidden behind my fence. He laughed too loud. "I need a place where I'm welcome," he said. There is an arrogance to people who mistake permission for entitlement. That night, I walked the property line with Milo. Tyler's sedan was there, lights off, dashboard glow like a half-closed eye. Motion sprinklers soaked the seats when the windows were cracked. I timed the controller to trigger at 1:17 in the morning. The alarm barked. Footsteps. Tyler stumbling down the driveway in a towel. He cursed in a voice that used to belong to a man who taught kids how to catch a ball. I recorded the shove at the garage. I didn't post it. You don't post things like that because posting turns them into spectacle and spectators proof you wrong. Instead, I backed up files. I named them by date and small cruelty. Tyler trespass 2025-09-11 to MP4. Lila rehearsal 2025-09-07 MP4. When your life is being redrafted, the verbs change. You stop pleading and start inventorying. You could call the police, Milo said, squinting at the soaked car. But the police like obvious crimes. This is a slow crime. This is a bureaucracy crime, and you play the long game. I turned the sprinkler controller to manual and laughed quietly when the digital clock blinked the time I had chosen to wake Tyler in the night. He banged his fists on the hood when he realized the seats were ruined. "Who did this?" he shouted at no one and everyone. I stood on my porch with a mug and felt something inside me settle down into a cold line. It wasn't happiness. It was order. Tyler ran a coaching group in a co-working space that smelled faintly of kombucha and desperation. I walked in during his seminar and introduced the very specific truth. Men with journals looked up like someone had announced a weather event. I laid out how he'd been rehearsing lines to manipulate a judge, how he'd parked on my property, how his role was built on a lie. He pushed me in front of the room. I pushed him back into a whiteboard. It wasn't elegant. It was a precise public dismantling. At the co-working space, I didn't wait for the crowd to ask questions. I spoke in the kind of calm that is close to a blade. "You told judges a story," I said, "and you told clients a different one. Which version of you is real?" A man at the back whispered, "This is awkward," and another man folded up his notebook as if the pages had burned. Tyler moved with the nervous energy of a man whose brand was his only currency. "Lila needs a stable man," he said, trying to reassert what had already been contradicted by his own texts. "She's protecting Emma." He said it so often that it started to sound like a sales pitch. He shoved me. I shoved him back, and the whiteboard took a hit. Markers rolled like escaped beetles. When he handed me his phone the next day, it felt like a confession folded into a cheap case. He wanted out, because he'd learned that sometimes being used costs more than you bargain for. Tyler texted me later. "She isn't what you think." He wanted an ally. He wanted a way out. He peddled small confessions and handed me his fractured phone full of texts from Lila calling Emma leverage and arranging contractors and payments that explained more than affection. He was not an equal. He was a purchase. The idea took root like something bitter. Split them and turn their plan into their ruin. I invited them to a supposed mediation at my house. I told Lila it would be private, with neighbors present only because Milo had been worrying out loud. A public audience was a feature, not a bug. Lila smelled opportunity in openness. Tyler smelled the chance to step into something he did not own. They came with the confidence of people who have made other people silence their scaffolding. I put the footage on the big TV after Lola sat down and took a breath. I didn't yell. I narrated. I let the tape do the work. The driveway video played, the rehearsal, Tyler's voice repeating words he thought would make judges merciful. The neighbors shifted. I clicked to the texts. Lila's voice came through, sharp and practical, writing formulas for custody and property, and how one plausible fear could move a judge faster than any last-minute apology. Neighbors had a particular way of translating scandal into currency. The HOA president, a woman named Donna who kept orchids like lieutenants, sat with her hands folded and watched the screen. "I can't believe it," she said, and her voice was the cathedral bell of the whole subdivision. Milo had lined up a few people who had been there for years. A nurse who worked nights and saw Tyler stumble, a teacher whose kid sat with Emma, a man who ran the coffee cart near the marina. They were not jurors, but they were witnesses. They were the kind of people who would repeat a story in PTA groups and at summer picnics until it settled into accepted fact. "You're a monster," she said, which is something people say when they realize that someone won't be played like a pawn. "You can't do this. You can't ruin me." The word ruin was a plea and an accusation. I told her what I had already told myself. "You started a war with my family," I answered. She denied it, and in her denial, she called Tyler out to be quiet. That was the moment the room flipped. Tyler, who had been playing alpha, heard the word he had never been supposed to speak. "You were expendable." He looked at Lila the way a man looks at a mirror when he realizes he was polished for someone else's hands. He bolted. I followed. He slammed into his soaked car, started it, and drove like a man who had just lost more than a fight. I lifted the old galvanized toolbox I'd left on my porch and let it fall across his windshield. Glass bloomed. Sirens that had been distant moved closer. Tyler ran. He ran past neighbors down the street with his chest heaving. Lila dropped to her knees on my lawn and cried in the honest, furious way of people who have miscalculated the market that supported them. Her mascara ran in black tracks down her face. She was not arrested. She had not been jailed. She had been stripped where it counted, in the small town where people judge the woman who wagers her child and her name for a house. I stood in my doorway with the taste of iron and satisfaction and waited for the first officer to come ask questions. The officer who came to the door did not cuff me. He sat in his car, ran a report, and asked for our statements. I gave mine. I told the truth, which is a dangerous thing to do when you've already made someone bleed in the marketplace of reputation. The officer nodded as if to say, "We see a lot of small storms here. Sometimes they calm. Sometimes they don't." I kept my hands visible. That night, I lay awake and thought of smaller things. The way Emma stacks her blocks, the way she hums when she falls asleep, the way she drew our family as 3 stick figures with strong arms. I had hurt people to protect the thing that mattered most. The law would sort itself through papers and depositions later. For now, I had the house and the sounds of people who knew the truth. I held the house and my daughter with the exact, careful greed of a man who knows what matters and what can be burned away. Every small witness, every soaked seat, every cracked pane counted toward the truth. The town would remember, and I would not apologize. I flipped the envelope over, and the words inside looked like the beginning of a list. Eviction, court, custody. They had wanted to erase me with a stamp. Instead, I had answered with a living ledger of witnesses and an angry symmetry. The house held us both, the furniture and the stains of a marriage, but mostly the work we had done to keep a small human alive. I sat there until the sky outside my kitchen window lightened, and Emma's laughter from Milo's porch drifted in like a treaty. "You never left," Milo said over coffee in the morning, and his voice was simple, which meant it was final enough. I held my daughter's tablet in my hands and watched the clip again, not because I needed proof anymore, but because watching it once more felt like closing a book with a decisive slam. They had tried to remove me with words. I had answered with witnesses, water, and glass. The house would keep our stories, and that was enough.